All right. Welcome to Future Focus. I'm your host, Delfeayo Marsalis, and I'm very glad to have a gentleman who is one of the jazz greats on the acoustic bass, and he's played with so many different guys. One of my heroes, J.J. Johnson, of course, the great saxophonist Dexter Gordon, and the list goes on and on. And as you can hear, he's a virtuoso of the instrument. We're very glad to welcome Mr. Rufus Reid. All right.
How you doing, Jay?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Nice to
Good
be
to
here.
see you. Yes, indeed.
Sir. Long time.
Yes,
yeah.
sir.
Too long.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So let's talk a little bit about what attracted you to the bass and when you first started playing.
Well, that's an interesting question. The bass chose me. I used to be a trumpet player, but I came to my senses a long time ago, you know.
Okay.
But I don't know. Even when I didn't know much about I knew what the bass did, I just didn't know that much, but I knew it satisfied me more than I did the trumpet. And then I began to, people would ask me to play with them because they liked the feeling. Even with some funny notes, I had a good feeling. So that's where it starts, you know, it's got to have a good feeling. And then eventually I learned to kind of edit out those little funny notes. And it just began to develop like that. And of course, I went into the military. I was in the Air Force Band as a trumpet player. And then and they had a lot of trumpet players, and the bass was starting to take over because I basically taught myself. And I had a lot of time, most of the day, to either mess up or utilize in some kind of way. So I taught myself, and eventually I just guys wanted to play, and I played. And then I got sent to Japan. And then I asked the commanding officer if I could actually play the string bass in the concert band, so I could learn to read the bass clef and use the bow. And they had a lot of other better trumpet players than I was at that time. And then I got the chance to really play a lot. Then I saw Ray Brown live, and it changed my whole life. I said, this is it, you know. So to make a long story short, it basically chose me, but I knew if I wanted to do it, I had to get somebody to really teach me how to. I mean, I had pretty good ears, but as you know, that can only get you so far.
Now, when you started and you were teaching yourself, did you use any books or did you just play by ear? What was your method?
Yes, both of them. I taught myself by ear. My very first record my brother bought was Walking with Miles, with J.J. and Percy Heath and Kluk. And I mean, it's kind of interesting that I got a chance to be close with Percy and to actually play for several years with J.J. Johnson, many, many years later. But that album really, I could sing it, all the solos. I had a funny sound on trumpet, so it was funky, kind of like Miles in a way at that time, but I didn't know what I was doing. I was just imitating as much as I could. And actually, when I was in high school, I'll never forget this, I was running for senior vice president of the student body, and I pantomimed Satchmo. You know, I had my trumpet and my handkerchief, and I had it was from the movie, you know, High Society.
Okay.
Where, you know, I love that. And I actually saw him live. And that actually empowered me to be even a better trumpet. You know, it was incredible. But the bass took over, you know, and so when I got...
Did you win the election?
No, I didn't. I didn't. I lost, you know. But it was, everybody had fun. You know, we had fun. And but the music has been part of my life all my life. Even when my mother used to say I used pans and pots and pans, and the radio would be playing, and I'd be trying to do something, you know. So I never thought about being a jazz musician, and I love music, and I played marching bands and all that kind of stuff. But I've played in circus music, I've played bar mitzvahs and Italian weddings, and I mean, it was just, if I played, I think eventually I began to understand I could tell the difference when somebody really could play, and I said, and then I played with some other people who really couldn't play, and I said, I want to go over there.
Yes, and play.
And I have been the underdog for a long time when I was young, which I think is one of the best places for a person to be, to learn how to really get it together. And I've been also fortunate to have people say, no, this is what you do. And Eddie Harris was my first real professional guy, and he was very articulate. And he said, all I want you to do is be on time and be able to play.
Okay.
And that's a pretty profound statement. And on many levels, he's probably one of the most influential guys that inspired me, because he practiced all the time. He was on top of it, business-wise, the whole bit. It was great. So from that time of getting out of the military, I sold my trumpet, bought a bass, started taking lessons, classical lessons, mainly, because just to learn how to get better sound on the instrument. And then I could do what I want with it after that. So that's where it kind of started.
Now, you've written one of the premier books about bass technique.
Yes, my book is called The Evolving Bassist. Here again, I was with Eddie Harris, and I had done a workshop. And it was at one of the first ones, the first time I met Jamie Aebersold. And he heard me playing with Eddie Harris, and he said, would you like to do a workshop? I have never done one, so yeah, sure, why not? So we went, and I had about 25 bass players, and they knew nothing. And I was talking about Ray Brown's book, but I mean, you had to play pretty good just to even get through Ray Brown's book, and there was no verbiage about why he made these choices and whatnot. So I began to sketch things to make it a little easier for the students. And so we're driving in the car, and I was telling Eddie, I said, man, Ray Brown didn't even know how many. I sold 25 of his books for him, you know. He said, well, why don't you write your own book? I said, what are you talking about? He said, you're intelligent, aren't you? I said, he said, you're a college graduate, aren't you? I said, yeah. And he said, you out here playing with me on Atlantic Records, right? I said, yeah. He said, write your own book. He says, but two things. Finish the book. A lot of people write books, but they never finish them.
Okay.
And then he said, own it. Now, when he said that, I didn't know it was so profound at that time. But the book came out in '74, and it's still on the market, and I still own it.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right.
And so I'm indebted to him on a lot of levels, because he taught me how to go in the studio, how to act on the road, how to look after your brothers on the road traveling, just kind of look out for you, because that's your family on the road. And so, and he treated me professionally, paid me when he said, and paid me what he said he would pay me. And hey, from the beginning. So I've been spoiled, and he taught me a lot. But when he's the one that's actually responsible, and I began to put it together. And I would go out, and in fact, Detroit was one of the first places I went. We were in town. We played at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'd get up at 9 to try to go hawk the book. And of course, most people said, well, we have people who are our buyers that we buy from. And so I said, well, I'll leave a little brochure. And I came back and I said, he says, if your book looks like that brochure, I'll buy 100 copies now. And I said, I did just that. I said, what? And, wow. And this was, it was pretty amazing. And this was a place called Grinnell's Music Store. And what blew me away, the guy, he says, yeah. And the books was being printed as we had spoken at that time. And he says, you have to start thinking about book 2. I said, what? And he taught me about the publishing, and he says, Mel Bay, he gave him his chance and stuff like that. And he says, remember this movie that came out, The Sting? Well, Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag was in that movie, and people were coming in the store wanting the music. He says, well, I didn't want the sheet music. I got the book that had 20 of his stuff in here. And so people would come in and wanted to get the $1.25 sheet music. He said, well, I'm sorry, I don't have that, but I do have the book. And he sold over 1,000 copies in a month.
Wow.
And so he had a hunch. He says, I don't know. He says, I have a hunch about your book. And the reason I bought the book, I wrote the book, was there are a lot of quote-unquote guys who wanted to play jazz. And there was no jazz books really on the market that gave them enough information. There were classical books, but they didn't want to learn how to do that. And because they said, well, I had to use the bow and all this stuff. And it's all mental, you know, anyway. And so I began to buy every book that was on the market and tried to get something. I said, well, this is good. This is good. Ron Carter had a book, had some really nice stuff in it. Richard Davis had a book. The first book I actually had was Bob Haggart.
Okay.
He was probably one of the first books that actually taught you something, but it wasn't a jazz book. It was just learning how to play harmony and roots and fifths. Had a picture. There's an E flat. Okay, that's how I learned where that was. You know, okay. And so I had pictures and everything. I had to put the bass on the airplane, in an airplane seat. In fact, that became a real novel thing for the book. But it was information that I felt if a person was serious, these are things that helped me, and I'm happy to say it's still on the market, and I've added to it. I did do a book 2, and then eventually I compressed and consolidated, so it's now one larger book.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. I want to talk a little bit about some of the guys that you played with. Now, you mentioned earlier that you had Miles's record that had J.J. and Percy Heath. So now, you know, I would imagine you look up to these guys, you're on the record, and you got the record, you see their names, and then all of a sudden you're in a situation where you're either playing with them or, you know, you're more like a contemporary or, you know, like a peer. What is that like?
Well, I don't think I've ever have been a peer of JJ, you know, although he treated us